This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
We'll be talking about two things. One is we'll introduce an idea that you use social media to build knowledge networks, so it's not really about the numbers, it's about the quality of people that you go out and engage with. And then Dot will go into detail about how we use this logic to create impact for the science and culture theme. In terms of an introduction, so I have a research background in something called biofeedback gaming from York. I spent a lot of time working with young people and breath awareness. Now I work as an independent consultant in sort of culture, heritage and local government, doing stuff with digital, miscellaneous stuff.
I'm Dot, I'm the project administrator for the AHRC Science and Culture theme. I'm based in the Institute of Philosophy. My background is in museums administration.
So, three things. The first is just a simple introduction to how the web has changed and how people access information online and why we need to change. Then an example of the framework that we've used to build participation using social media, especially for science and culture. A couple of examples of how individual researchers and institutions are doing something similar externally. And then, like I said, we'll go into details for the Science and Culture project as well. So this is just a slide to give you some context of, how we arrived at the point that you need to get people to think critically when you're engaging with social media. So like I said, my background was in something called biofeedback gaming. So I created this device that you could strap around your chest and then you could play games using your breath as a controller. So when you're creating that tech, you think it's amazing, it's sexy, it's going to change the world. But when you take it in that context where it's supposed to be used as a classroom, you realize that people have the same associations with that interesting piece of kit as they would have with a projector or a laptop. So it's just another piece of ICT, and the same anxiety surface where you don't know what to do with it, what are the benefits, and so on. So what I did after the PhD and 3 years of working with a lot of technology, I started working with young people on the same themes, which is breathing, breath awareness, and behavior, without using any tech, which was just a sort of good learning experience. How do you get people to commit to a task? And that's what led to the development of the framework that I use for any digital engagement project. It's 4 steps. So always start with the people who are associated with the project. We need to do some work to raise their awareness of what social can do. Also, if they're up for it, make them more visible on social networks, so it doesn't remain this abstract concept. The second thing is, once you've got a group of people who are on board, then you try and change the content you're creating. This doesn't have to be published on a social network right away, but it's again that discipline of, can I start writing content that's more reflective? So rather than just dry factual information, can we let people know why the thing we're doing is important and why it matters to us? Use that reflective content to create engagement. And this is also a trust-building exercise, because very often the people who write the content, they are the specialists, and the people who are creating engagement, they might be specialists or they might be marketing, communications, and so on. So that cycle of taking content from one person, giving it to another, and then they go and create engagement around it is also trust building, and it builds confidence. The other thing this allows you to do is, if you have genuinely reflective, authentic content, then you can build smaller communities, but communities who are interested in the subject matter. And we'll talk about this in detail when we talk about the science and culture theme. So you've got that small community, then you turn that into participation. So ultimately you're going online to find a group of people who can do things with you or for you, and that activity can happen either online or offline. So the shift that has happened, and the reason we need to think about these frameworks, is that, let's say 10 years ago, people used to go to a website had a lot of information, and it was static information, it didn't periodically change, maybe there was an update every now and then, and you were consuming that. If if I zoom into this right now, what's happening is we're at a point where people are discovering content. And I have two stats here. So the first stat is 72% of all online adults are using social networking websites. And the second one is in 2011, news websites got 9% of their traffic from social media. So a lot of people are online, they're sharing information they read, they have conversations, and through that you come across news, and then you go to a website. So what we have to do is, we just can't provide a website as a repository of information and expect people to come to us. We have to participate in the conversations that are happening on these social networks, encourage social sharing, and then build our own knowledge networks. So, like I said, just providing information isn't enough. If you have a website, that's great, but you also need to provide the context for that information. And this is what happens on social media. So let people know, why is this information relevant? Go out there and discover your audience and enter into conversation, and then move towards impact. Now, impact can also mean many things. That's one of the things I've come across. In higher education, in research, impact is sometimes this very vague thing. So you define your own version of impact. And for science and culture, we talked about creating an opportunity for early career researchers as a desirable impact. And we'll go into details about that in a bit. But impact could be a discussion, just more visibility, maybe you have a debate, or you're encouraging participation in some sort of event. The other point I want to make is that people tend to think that everything is social networking or everything is social media. This is a sort of slightly nuanced activity. So in terms of social tools, you can network, which is meet people. You can create your own media, which is audio, video, words and images. You can also participate in sharing, or you can share your location. That is also a form of social. This is an example of how established organizations are using social in creative ways. So the RSA has started using BuzzFeed, which is a website about cats and bullet points. And what they're doing is they're using that format, amongst other things. But BuzzFeed has these 10 reasons why you should do this, 5 reasons why you should do that. So the RSA have been clever, where they're saying, okay, if people read a lot of bullet points and they share content that is in bullet points, why don't we talk about subjects that we want to in that format? And this is a very important distinction between dumbing stuff down or making it accessible. The other point around social media is that one of the advantages of using social media is you don't need high production value, so it doesn't need to be a super slick video. We are all, to a large extent, experts in our own right in our subject matters as researchers, postdocs, and so on. What we need to do is just develop that little discipline of saying, okay, what is it that's trending within our subject areas, and can we use social media to put across a particular point of view? And that's what this is an example of a show on NPR, which is called On the Media. So again, it has low production values, but they have a really, really rich discussion every weekend. And that's what is helping them raise that profile. And the third thing, again, about social sharing is that we don't have to have the pressure of creating all our own content. There are lots of people talking about lots of different things. What we need to do is go out there and see what is the content that we can share, or in some instances, can we leverage our position to get people to create content for us. So a quick snapshot of some current and emerging trends in research, culture and heritage circles. So the first is open access. Now here in sort of academic research, I've got an example of something that the Swedish National Heritage Board is doing. They're using Flickr Commons. So that's a niche platform within Flickr, and they are using it to make their archive public. So this is one curator who's uploaded 1,325 images. Now she's very passionate about these, and her goal is that I'll upload these images. I don't want people just to see them, I want them to see them, but also then share their stories. So you've got images and conversations. So she's creating context, and then they're bringing that back into the organization. So over a period of, I think, 5 years, they've got 6.5 million views. So you've got a meaningful context for why you're doing this, and you also have the numbers, clear sense of purpose. Another thing you can do, which is becoming popular as a result of social media, is different kinds of public events. So you have hack events, you have Better Kuchas, and for AHRC we run an Ignite, and Dot's going to tell you what an Ignite is in a bit. This is an example of an event called Museum Mix. It's a 3-day event where you bring in traditional and non-traditional museum audiences and you ask them to create an actual physical artifact that can be used in museums. And the third is engagement. So the point I guess I'm making here is that social media isn't just for engagement, it is to also participate in specialist themes and ideas that are emerging. So you don't have to go and start your own open access platform, but you can access commentary and thinking, or you can share your own point of view. Now in terms of engagement, here's a really good example. So last year, Maastricht University, they had their first tasting of lab-grown meat. Did anyone come across this? So what they did is they filmed it, and it was a live broadcast. So they got 97,000 Twitter users. That was the estimate reach of their live stream. Again, I would say that is not important or what was happening in real time. What's more valuable is what happened afterwards. So that's another sensibility for you to consider, that if we are using social media to create impact, the return isn't necessarily immediate. You can go and introduce a certain kind of thinking or start a debate and then see what happens and then shape that. Another very famous example is a crowdfunding campaign by Professor Sue Black or Dr. Sue Black from University College London. Yeah, University College London, Saving Bletchley Park. Anyone heard about this? Yeah. So this was also a very clever campaign where she used various influencers on social networks to create a lot of impact and visibility for her message, and very quickly turn that into participation, where you are actually crowdfunding or participating in crowdfunding. So now we'll talk about the science and culture theme.
Yes, so I thought it would be useful to give a bit of context about what the science and culture theme is. So it's one of 4 themes run by the AHRC. The themes are key areas for research funding, and they're considered to be emerging areas of interest for arts and humanities researchers, and areas that are likely to shape or change multiple research interests in years to come. And the science and culture theme in particular is all about encouraging mutual exchange between researchers based in the sciences and the arts and humanities. And it encourages arts and humanities researchers to go beyond just researching the context of science, and instead to foster research that really contributes to scientific ideas. And part of the structure of the themes, the way they're set up, is the role of the Theme Leadership Fellow. This is where I come in and the work that we've been doing. So Professor Barry Smith, the Director of the Institute of Philosophy, is the Theme Leadership Fellow for Science and Culture. So the role is of an independent academic who's championing research funded in this area. So the website and the social media presence that we developed is at slightly arm's length to the AHRC. We've had a bit more time to particularly champion the research on the theme. So to date, science and culture funding has been awarded in the form of 15 exploratory awards, 10 fellowships, 18 research networks and 3 large grants. We've got projects based at universities across the UK, topics ranging from women in science research network to the infamous culture of scientific productions of human sugar interactions, which always brings a laugh. And within this group of research projects, we've got very varied digital footprints. So some of our projects are very active, some are completely inactive, some have ended. So we had lots of content to work with. Part of the work we did with Abhay was sort of to get the content out there, get people finding it and using it. So I worked with Abhay for 8 months, from August to March, 2 days a month, developing content for the website, working on Twitter campaigns to accompany events, hosted social media workshops for some of our award holders, and in particular we organised an Ignite event, which we'll talk about in more detail.
So I think the point here is as well that we were very aware that we couldn't allocate a lot of time to social, and we had limited capacity, but we had to be really focused from the start.
Yeah. So we started the new Twitter account in May 2013. So 1,800 tweets later, we've got just over sort of 1,000 followers. So I wanted to ask what worked, what didn't work. Over to you.
So how do you start building your community online when you clearly have something that is specialist, niche in terms of, for example, human-chicken interaction project, at the same time is very varied. So you have what, 18 networks, 3 major grounds and so on. So, you know, when I said we work with people, so we started actively engaging some of our researchers and saying, can you write content for us? Initially, it was also a trust-building exercise, so we told them, you can write about whatever you want. It is our responsibility to create engagement. In some instances, we were lucky where people wrote blog posts about stuff that is topical in a very general sense, for example, big data, open data. Then we made sure that we use that content, piece of content, to create impact and visibility. So for a big data piece, we got 600 views in a fortnight. In other instances, like the piece which is about is transcultural psychiatry corned beef to the humanities, we felt that is also our responsibility to create engagement for something like this. So we spent a fair amount of time researching independent networks on Twitter and other social networks who would be interested in transcultural psychiatry. And I think the advantage we had was we were actively having a conversation. So we'd go and find this network and we'd either ask them to read this, comment on something, or share. Not just putting it out there and hope the right people pick it up because it's got the right keywords. So blogging was our device to make the theme accessible. In the early days, we used Twitter to increase readership and build our community. Again, we removed the pressure of chasing lots of numbers. We didn't want a lot of people and a lot of white noise. We wanted to build a community who are interested in interdisciplinary research. We were also very consistent in how we were using social media. So do you want to talk about the themes? And
yeah, so we developed some project of the day, project in focus. We ran that for a couple of months. So quite standard tweets about what we're focusing on, and then sharing news stories on similar themes to widen up the discussion. It was a way of kind of drawing people's attention to what content was there already. Some of it was more successful than others. There were days where people didn't reach tweets, but there were other days that worked well.
So initially when you go on social media and you set up a Twitter account, no one's going to know why you're there and what your purpose is. So in terms of building expectations, very deliberately we would, content of the day or theme of the day. That was just a case of building expectation that every week on this day we would talk about a certain subject and we would share information from our own archives as well as circulate information. So in terms of how do we move towards participation, the goal was to unpack the idea of what an opportunity for an early career researcher is. Okay? So what we didn't want was a one-off event with lots of people in the room, lots of good-natured backslapping and drinks, and then nothing happens. So we said, why don't we try and organize an Ignite, and Dot will explain what an Ignite is, but the principle was that can we use social media to make an event happen in the physical, and that event should do two things. The first is it should encourage interdisciplinary researchers to talk about their work in new ways. That's a story-based format. Secondly, it is our responsibility to give these researchers a grand stage to talk about their work. So we chose the Natural History Museum. So that was our opportunity. If you're doing interesting work, come and talk about it to a big audience in a grand stage in an interesting way. By this time, we also had about 1,000 followers on our Twitter account. So that's our specialist community. Then we started engaging them more directly, saying, okay, we have a call for participation. We put it out there, and either you can respond to it directly, or you can pass the message on. So that's the advantage when you build your specialist communities, that you can reach out to the right audiences. That's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about social media, is that we're not going there just to immediately be heard, we're going there so that our message can be transmitted. We got 58 submissions in a month, maybe?
Yes, yeah.
And approximately a quarter of them came via announcements on Twitter. The other point here is, just because you're using social media, don't forget the channels that work. Fortunately or unfortunately, getting into people's inboxes is still the most reliable way to get them to do anything. So, Don, you want to talk about some of the work you did in terms of newsletters? I think we made sure the AHRC newsletter went out.
Yes, I suppose they use just mail as a standard way of advertising events. Mailing lists that we had, wider AHRC mailing lists as well as social media.
And the other point is also using one resource again and again. So we only had one web page for the entire process. So in the first 2 months, that web page just said, if you are an early career researcher, make sure you apply. Once we got our applications, we just updated the copy on that same web page saying, if you're interested in attending this event, click here to go to Eventbrite. So you don't have to keep creating new pages. The logic here is, if you've got a page and that link has been circulated 500 times on Twitter, it's already out there. So just get people to come back to the same resource and you're changing the information there.
So perhaps just to explain what an Ignite is to people who don't know. So the event we held was an afternoon event at the Natural History Museum, and we welcomed applications from early career researchers, so people with sort of less than 7 years post-PhD experience. And each speaker would speak for 5 minutes, accompanied by 20 slides, which operated automatically. So it's a real art to present in that concise way. Requires expert timekeeping and a real kind of flair. So as I can say, and sort of topics that we had ranged from technologies of the sun and literature, science and culture to neuroscience, art and therapy of music. So it's quite a diverse range of speakers and topics.
These are some of the sort of examples of the tweets that we used.
So we used Twitter to create a sense of anticipation of the event. Also, one of the types of content that we produced around the event was profiles of the speakers. So a kind of Q&A series of answers with people before the event. So we uploaded one of those each day in advance.
So is that similar 4-step process where you start with the people? So people associated with the project, with the Ignite, we wanted to highlight them. And we also asked them to talk about their work in interesting ways. So, describe your work in a tweet or Q&A, give us some reflective commentary, and we circulated that as well. So in terms of end result, once we had our 48, we reached out to people to start booking, and we got about 200 tickets booked up. They were free, and that happened in a fortnight or 3 weeks or a month.
Maybe a bit longer.
Anything you'd like to add to this?
No, I think that's good. And yes, the event was filmed, so afterwards we had 15 films of talks, which we then launched in a similar way afterwards, day by day.
And that's another important consideration. When you are running an event on social media, very often people build up to it, then the thing happens, and then it suddenly dies. So what we want to do is make sure, let people know what has exactly happened. And that's also an example of relationship building. So the next time you go back to your community, you can tell them, listen, this is what we did, now we need to do something else, do you want to come on board? So it's that sense of journey.
Yeah, perhaps to comment that even now, sort of 3 months after the event, somebody contacted me this week about all these films, could they put it on the website? So it sort of runs on its own.
So what are your tools of the trade? And I don't think either of us are social media specialists. We're using the mainstream platforms. So we use Twitter, we used our blog, and we used our email. In terms of metrics that matter, you just need to be aware that, simple things like are your tweets being retweeted, for example, or do you need to change your call to action? If you're putting links out there, are people favoriting it? So favorites have become a way of bookmarking content. Third is, if you are asking questions, are people replying to you, so are you getting mentions? The two tools that we did use were Tweet Reach, which is free to use. It gives you an idea of how far your tweet has reached. And also a list of who your top influencers are. That means people who responded or retweeted your tweet the most. That's good intelligence to have, because the next day or the following week, if you want to start your conversation, you reach out to people who are already speaking with you. The other tool that we used was Sprout Social. And that was more around, again, it was scheduling content and basic analytics. You have to pay for Sprout Social. I think the starter package is around £20 a month. Many of you might already be using something called Hootsuite. Is that correct? Sprout Social is a better and cheaper alternative. On blogs, there are two metrics that you need to think of. Again, this is Google Analytics. So the first is bounce rate. How many people are leaving your page after the first, how many people are leaving your site after the first page itself? Second is average time on site. So if they do come to the site, are they actually reading stuff? Or do they come and then click away? And third is email. We use traditional mailing lists here. Does anyone use, what's it called, WebMonkey? No, MailChimp. Are you all MailChimp users? That's a strange question.
I was just going to ask a question about the chickens and the controversy that happened about that. I was just wondering whether or not, I guess I was just vaguely thinking about this kind of no publicity is bad publicity thing, and whether or not the kind of negative press coverage and media stuff around the chickens was actually ultimately usable to your advantage.
Yeah, I think so. I think that people have heard about that project and perhaps have been following it up. There has been more recently much more positive coverage of it. I had an article in Nature. I think if you follow up the negative with events and put the right information out there about why the project is valuable, counteract the criticism.
Yeah. Is that something you've encountered before, like in different contexts, turning a bad news story into something positive?
Yes, so when I was working with the BC British Council, they always have that fear that if we make something public, we'll come under attack because we have a lot of money and it's very subjective. So I guess the slightly diagnostic answer is that the first thing you do is you try and generate goodwill for any project. Celebrate other experts, talk about other people, and build a community who are interested and invested in your subject area before speaking about it in a very generic sense. Yeah, is that correct?
Yeah.
So when starting a social media campaign like this, how much do you do it sort of in advance compared to sort of ad hoc as it goes along? Because obviously you will presumably plan some of this to try to get the maximum out of it, but how much of that stays as rigid and sort of thought ahead of time, and how much do you just do as it goes?
So two rules, and you can add input as well. The first one is whatever you plan, put all your ideas out there, but in general, you will probably implement 60% of what you plan. And the other thing is, in terms of running an actual campaign, 50% of it is really good planning. So you have these milestones. This is when you do one task, then you do another task, but with the understanding that everything can change. So you just need a framework. And that's what we use. So we had a sense that yes, on this day, the call for applications will go out. Then exactly 1 month later, we'll ask people to book tickets. But if we haven't had enough, if you haven't received enough applications, then those dates are changeable.
I think sort of it was necessary at the beginning to do a lot more planning of content, whereas as it's become more familiar, it's an easier process.
I can't remember exactly what you said, but I saw the logic of it. So you mentioned getting into people's inboxes, which is still the most sort of, and if you were, say, trying to, like your target audience were like journalists or people that are happy to have a lot of noise on Twitter, but are a bit resistant to having, because they get so many emails and things anyway, what's a good strategy for that? I mean, I know that this is people like academics and things, but yeah, to make that jump and sort of say, okay, come on, sign up to our weekly digest thing.
There are a couple of ground rules for that as well. So the first is, if a journalist is on social media like Twitter, check out his or her Twitter bio. It sounds obvious, but very often they let you know where to pitch, which email address to send. Second one is have a look at how the journalist is on social media. If they're having a conversation, engage them in a conversation. Final thing is it's always good to have a face-to-face. So if you can have a Skype or a meeting in person, try and arrange that via social media as well.
Yeah.
Because what you need to do is get an understanding of how they think, as opposed to for them to understand what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah, and then you create more of a person.
Because you're right, they will be constantly inundated, and they probably have a very strong bullshit meter, and they know what to ignore and what not. So
I mean, yeah, I'm just thinking, like, even me, I hesitate now when I sign up for, like, even if it's a weekly email, because and I'm not even a journalist or anyone with any particular, but I just think, no, I can't have any more emails. But I wonder how you can sort of, reach that with. That's really helpful.
you have a question?
Largely about, I suppose, Fallon, science and culture it's proven quite successful, presumably, using social media in this kind of guess. Well, that's what came across in the presentation. You may disagree.
It's all lies.
But do you think, for projects in general of this sort of similar ilk, that this is definitely the way to go, or do you think there would be sort of ways that you change how you approach it in the future?
Personally, I think that if it's a publicly funded project, it's great to share as much content in a public way. I think that you should integrate that from the start. You shouldn't just disseminate research at the end of the project. You should include the public conversation from the beginning.
What I'd also say is there's a very big difference between intent and actually doing things. So one of the things we've noticed is many of the teams saying, yes, we want to use social media, but then you realize they either lack the skills to use social tools or the awareness of what I need to say. So always filling in the gaps if there's any training that needs to be provided. In general, there's always a 2 to 3 month learning curve as well, between saying I want to use social to actually using social.
Just a related question, I guess, but I'm just wondering what, specifically with science and culture, what the kind of core objectives are of the kind of social media aspect of that. Is it kind of promotion and PR, or is it a kind of, is there some kind of grander sort of culture change kind of agenda, or?
I think mainly promotion. I think also public engagement. I think it has that kind of role.
I think it had a blank canvas as well in a way to shape this as a way that was generally useful for us. So promotion, that idea of creating an opportunity. And in running that Ignite, many more institutions have heard about science and culture. And that's some of the feedback we got from Barry, who's been leader as well. So it also helps raise your reputation of the project.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. Maybe building on the success it would be better to formulate a more precise idea about what we're doing with it. That's something to do.
Does anyone have any ideas of how they could apply such a process, or what they'd like to apply it for?
I do.
Do you want to share it with the others?
I mean, probably some people already know, but I'm already working with Abhay to build up our social media presence for a humanities festival that I'm organising called Being Human, which we're obviously trying to implement some of the same stuff, I guess. But I think it's, a lot of it, from my perspective, is sort of getting into the habit of mind and doing this stuff and kind of naturalising it. So I find that I tend to think about social media in the kind of wrong way around, and trying to use it as rather than make it work for me, I try to kind of make it work, if you see what I mean.
So it becomes useful for you rather than just another thing that you have to do.
Exactly, yeah.
I've noticed you've also become more active on Twitter.
Do you want to just
give
converted me?
Tell me how did that happen? So do you want to share with the others how did that happen, or what was the barriers that you overcame?
Well, I don't know. I would say that with our work, Damien, he's been on Twitter and he says it's great for consuming research. And so taking that, I revived my own Twitter account and obviously looked at the AHRC one, the Human Rights Consortium one. And the turning point for me was when, sitting on my sofa at like 9 o'clock at night, I managed to arrange a collaboration between Platform, this Arts Activism and Education NGO, and the Human Rights Consortium, and then they cited one of my blog posts in a report, and we worked together. And I was just like, just through 140 characters, you can do that. Rather than emailing and setting up a meeting and all this sort of stuff. You have an instant sort of knowing connections, and that was a real turning point for me. And then beyond that, it's just gone crazy. So.
I think it's quite easy for people to sort of digest because it's just 140 characters. It's like you're saying, people just get bombarded with emails. We email a lot of journalists and often they just don't respond, but they do respond more to Twitter sometimes because they can just see succinctly what you're talking about. It's much easier for them to process, really.
So many people have it on their phone as well, don't they? So it comes up and people just respond quickly when you're on the move, rather than you're like, this is a really long email, I'll do it when I arrive at the office, and then they forget.
Is that immediacy? But also, I like the point you're making. If you apply that sort of internally, Twitter is also a great way of saying what are the 20 different ways in which we can talk about this project, which might be really specialist as tweets. So that's a great discipline as well. If you're reaching out to journalists, you can try a variation of, you don't have to say the same old thing.
And it's quite a challenge for academics because they tend to be very verbose and use lots of jargon. To try and get an academic to sum up their project, even in a small paragraph, is quite challenging.
That's why we chose Ignite as a format for the talks, where we're saying the real challenge is 5 minutes, 20 slides, and they're changing.
I think so. For an academic, would be a real discipline, I think, for them to do it in 140 characters.
But it's definitely the future for public engagement. It's sort of you've got this 140 characters, but then behind that it's so expansive. If that person is reached, rather than slamming a massive report down and being like, read this, everyone.
Definitely. I think, that culture is kind of changing so quickly. A lot of the younger academics or people who are starting out can actually really get that. They have to, really.
And a lot of them blogging and stuff, aren't they?
Can I just ask about the Ignite? Is that something that you sort of invented, or is it an AHRC thing?
It's a global movement.
Oh, okay. So it's like a TED sort of format?
You don't have to license an Ignite. TEDx you have to license. So the advantage was you don't have to pay anyone. It's already a global movement, and it's very well known.
And so I mean, in what sense is it, do you just say we're doing an Ignite?
Yeah.
Come on. And I guess it's a bit more open in that sense that people can sort of, like you said, you've got so many people applying, and it's that sort of very concise format. Is that common across all Ignites?
Yes.
Or do you set that?
It has to be 5 minutes, 20 slides. But you can definitely set the agenda. So we said you have to be doing interdisciplinary research, early career researcher. Even from the 58, we only shortlisted 13. So it's not a case of saying, okay, we're doing this, which is very popular, come and do whatever you want.
Yeah. And it doesn't have, it's not like academic necessarily, or...
You can have an Ignite about anything.
Right.
Our Ignite was about interdisciplinary research.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Interesting. It's really cool.
Anyone spoken at a TEDx or an Ignite?
Seeing a couple of Ignites though, always really good.
There's another one that you're talking about called Pechakucha.
It's very similar to Ignite, isn't it? But
It started in Japan. It's, I think, again, 5 minutes, 20 slides, 15 seconds per slide.
Any other questions? Thoughts? Shall we look out there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's say thank you to both Dr. and Abhay.